Good evening. It is my distinct honor, privilege, and pleasure to introduce our next speaker. And as Maria told you this morning, he is a man who needs no introduction. So I guess I'm done. So Tim Boyd is someone who has worked his way up through the ranks in Theosophy, in the society. As a young man, he encountered Theosophy. I don't remember his exact story. I know I've heard it. But as a young man, he encountered Theosophy and began as a student, continues as a student, as we all do, and a member of his local group. The local group happened to be in Chicago, which is where the headquarters of the American section is, Alcott. So he was a frequent visitor at Alcott as well, getting to know people and people getting to know him. As the years went by, he eventually became a member of the board of directors there. And I remember that. Tim and I have been friends for over 30 years. And Tim has been a member of the society for 45 years, something like that. So he got to be a member of the board of directors where he served, then became vice president. He also, I have to put a plug in for the TOS, he was also president of the TOS in the United States, and then became elected as president of the American section. From there, he never stopped working. All of this was recognized by all of you, and Tim Boyd is now our illustrious international president, and also the ex officio president of TOS. So it has been my privilege to know Tim as a person, as a man, as a friend for many years, and again, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce him tonight as our speaker, and he will tell us about Theosophy for tomorrow.
There is a small platform here for people of less stature to stand upon. So I'm going to forego it. I assume that you all can see me. I see you. Very happy to be able to speak with you this evening, as there's so many things that we do have to share about. Very happy also for Nancy to be the one to introduce me, having known Nancy for many, many years and worked with her in a variety of situations and settings, now all around the world, and now also, of course, TOS. Want to talk and say just a few things this evening about some subjects about which we probably have given some thought. Hopefully we have, because the primary subject I'd like to talk about is Theosophy. And of course, the organization that came into being as the vehicle for the communication of Theosophy, which is to say our Theosophical Society. Probably I'm not telling anyone that they don't know when I say that Theosophy has never been defined. Sometimes it makes things a little bit difficult for us when people ask us what in fact is Theosophy. I have often thought it would be relatively nice to have a really short, punchy answer, so that riding up in the elevators here, I could tell somebody between the 15th floor and the 10th floor, what Theosophy is. Of course, we were not given that, and it's a very good thing that we have not been. Which is not to say that certain definitions have not been put forward at different times, particularly by Helena Blavatsky, I find myself drawn to two in particular. The one where she speaks about Theosophy as being the ageless wisdom, tested and verified by generations of seers. That sounds very specific. It gives that feeling that it's something that if you were to say it, it would communicate something. The ageless wisdom tested and verified. Obviously, it talks about the experiential nature of this thing we call Theosophy, because it is verifiable. It can be tested. But then it always comes back to what is this ageless wisdom? If we're not calling it Theosophy, we're calling it some other word and not defining it. She also made the comment on one occasion that Theosophy is altruism first and foremost. So perhaps that takes it into a more practicable realm, which is to say that the practice of compassionate, conscious compassionate activity, that practice which we identify as service, might be something that comes close to defining Theosophy. The fact of the matter is that by its very nature, Theosophy as the ageless wisdom is limitless. It is not bound by time. It is not bound by particular concepts or the language within it by which it has been expressed throughout time. And if we're going to be honest, when we talk about Theosophy, to some extent, we can speak more easily about what it isn't than what it is. And when we tend to pontificate on our beloved Theosophy, the best we are doing is outlining the extent of our own limitations, which is to say that what we are capable of understanding of it lies within this boundary which we then define, because it is ever unfolding. In 1875, as we know, the Theosophical Society was begun, and it was the occasion at which Theosophy in our contemporary sense was reintroduced to humanity. It had never gone anywhere. It had never disappeared. But the particular form in which we have encountered it is something that has been reintroduced, and it was an elaboration on that which existed before. It has always been something. It's ever present, never diminished, but largely unseen, unrecognized, and necessarily limited in order for us to grasp some measure of what it might be. So this is the nature of this. It's not elusive. It's one of those things that when you experience it, you know it, but then try to tell what it is. HPP had that problem, none less than the Buddha himself. The legend has it that the Buddha, at the moment of his enlightenment, he had a profound realization. One of his realizations was that he could not possibly communicate the nature of what it was that he had experienced. And initially, his decision was not even to try. We couldn't get it. Obviously, he changed his mind and set out for the next 50 years that he was alive to teach in a variety of ways, to try and engender the experience of enlightenment through a variety of ways and geared toward a variety of human temperaments. So this is the experience of this wisdom tradition. What we do know is that it is something that has been periodically reintroduced to address human capacity as it develops, and also to address human need at various different times in our unfoldment. So we find ourselves in one of those moments when Theosophy in its perhaps fullest form yet is available. HPB, among the many different difficulties that she encountered during her lifetime, one of them was that the wisdom teachings that she came to share, she was plagued with the realization that the world was not ready for these. In fact, she said that it would be 100 years before it would even be possible for us to grasp these things. It's very interesting because at the end of her life, the last years of her life found her in London. And in that setting is when she wrote all of her masterworks with which we are familiar: The Secret Doctrine, The Voice of the Silence, Key to Theosophy. There was this explosion of writing about wisdom that she did at that time. But at that time also, she gathered around herself a group, an inner group, 12 people that she began to teach in a way with the hope that this theosophical message could find a true home, in the sense of a place within the hearts of people where it could be experienced and then expressed. She commented in her initial writings about the founding of what was then to be the esoteric section, what became the esoteric school, that the Theosophical Society, she described it as two diametrically opposed things. She said it has been a stupendous success in terms of advancing these ideas into the popular mind. But she said it had been a dead failure in terms of the theosophy that was the intent of those who sent her to share, which is a lived and experienced expression of a universal kinship, universal brotherhood, in the language of our first object. So, in the waning days of her life, she brought around her this group. Also, having written The Secret Doctrine, she took time to talk to groups of individuals very closely about the meaning and to answer questions related to the Secret Doctrine. Years after her death, and actually years after this gentleman's death, his name was Robert Bowen, the notes that he had taken from the times that he sat with her, he and others sat with her, listened to her, asked her questions. These notes were found among his papers by his son after he died. And they have become something that's probably most, if not all of you, are familiar with. Sometimes it's titled How to Read the Secret Doctrine. Sometimes it's simply titled Notes on the Secret Doctrine. But Robert Bowen, very, very short, I think it's maybe 6 or 8 pages. Fascinating comment that was made. As I said, HPB was very much aware that what she had come to bring could not be understood during the time, brief time, that she had on earth. So when asked about the Secret Doctrine, one of the things that she said was that the Secret Doctrine is just a small fragment of the greater wisdom teaching, the greater understanding of theosophy that is available to those of a higher level of development than she was, and certainly than we are. But it's the smallest fragment of that, but it is as much as the world is capable of receiving through the next century, were her words. So this is something that is very profound, seems to be very direct, clear, and understandable, but somebody raised the question. You say this is all that the world is capable of receiving. What do you mean by the world? Obviously, if she had said it to me, maybe if she had said it to you, you would have let it go at that. Obviously, we know what the world is. It's something related to everybody and everything around us. But he wanted a more specific answer. What do you mean by the world? And I think her answer is quite telling. What she said was, the world is man, which is to say humanity, living in its personal nature. That's the world. The world is that combination of the minds of all of us living in our personal natures. And as we know from the Theosophical teachings, that perhaps is more clear. Personality being the body, the emotional nature, the lower mind, the desire realm, kama manas, all those sorts of terms used to describe the ordinary level of consciousness within which we function from moment to moment, day to day, year to year. The world is humanity living in its personal nature. And so this was her description of the moment. This was her description of the need. But from that, she went on to teach. And the teachings that she gave went on to become elaborated by those who came afterward. So the progression of Theosophy as we have come to know it has passed through a variety of ways that it has been expressed. To many, it began and it ended with HPB. Many of us in this room may be of that mind. But the fact is that as things moved along, Annie Besant arose. C.W. Leadbeater arose. This second wave of Theosophists who made the sincere attempt to link these teachings to contemporary science, for instance. So you had occult chemistry. You had the various ideas related to evolution and this growing mind about Darwinian evolution. These links that were attempted to be made. Some of them excellent, some of them with time we found that they didn't necessarily hold up as well. But still, the ideas, the concepts, the language that did not exist prior were being developed, were being elaborated. And so this is the trend that has occurred from Blavatsky and Alcott and Sinnett and Judge and the group that first appeared, to Besant, Leadbeater, to Krishnamurti, Shri Rama, Taimni. In every case, there has been some, not addition to the understanding, but the addition of another way of perhaps viewing this thing that we call Theosophy, of expressing how it might be something that could be of value and capable of being practiced within this thing we call the Theosophical Society. Excuse me if I get a brief sip of water. Also during HPB's time, one of the great regrets of her life as a teacher, and one of her great regrets in terms of its effect on the minds of the people that she communicated with, was that she was the one who first introduced the idea of the masters of the wisdom to the Western world. It was something that was a foreign concept to Western minds, and by virtue of its exotic seeming nature, it was something that was widely misunderstood. She would describe it as one of her great regrets that she ever introduced the names of the Mahatmas to be so misunderstood, which led to the desecration of their names and the meaning of the Mahatmas. In our time, we can see how it has progressed to a commercialization. Go on the internet, type in Mahatmas and see what you get. Probably nowadays we will be fortunate because one of the first things you'll encounter is the Theosophy Wiki, which was an effort that was deliberately attempted at the Theosophical Society in America because we just got tired of having to go back to Wikipedia time after time to change the many erroneous ideas that creep in every single day. I mean, you'd have to have an army of people to keep up with the constant changes. So we started our own wiki page, which now is a resource for the world. But once you get away from Theosophy Wiki, the strange, even commercial ideas that you encounter related to the Mahatmas, it indicates how someone like HPB could feel that this is something to regret. And there's even been a trivialization of it because the names and the concepts are so bandied about today. Actually, the last letter that was received from the Mahatmas came in 1900, and it was received by Annie Besant. And in that letter, the Mahatma himself, the comment that was made is that this cant of the masters, cant meaning this hypocritical sort of religious way of expressing an idea about the masters, must be put down, must be stopped. That it was throwing up a confusion of glamour, a confusion of ideas that completely clouded any potential benefit that might accrue. So the cant of the masters must be put down. That's been approached in a variety of ways since the initial days. Obviously, with the publication of the Mahatma Letters, it has become a vital insight for all of us into the thought and into the ways of the Mahatmas. But, you know, in all honesty, it was a book that was never supposed to be published. I mean, one of the things you find when you read the Mahatma Letters is the strong, clear language from Mahatma K.H. Do not publish these. Because the feeling was it would give just a disjointed idea, but to wait until the Secret Doctrine comes out. That'll answer your questions. But of course, they're published. And we have benefited from it. But this is, in a sense, what I'd like to do during our brief time this evening is this. You know, we've talked about the arc of this theosophical work. The theme for our convention speaks about the future and the ever-presence of this future. The future is now. So I'd like to just talk about this arc that we have been on. It's been for a brief time, 143 years. In the scheme of things, it's not that long, but it's longer than any of us have been here, certainly me. So this arc that we have been on. So the Mahatma Letters were published. One of the things that HPB talked about a great deal and wrote particularly in Key to Theosophy was about the nature of some of these cycles during which the wisdom is renewed here among human beings. And she talked about the importance of the timing for the founding of the Theosophical Society. Because in the last quarter of every century was when she said there would be always a new effort made by the great ones to influence humanity. The language she used was that at the last quarter of every century, there would be an outpouring or upheaval of spirituality. I can remember I had joined the Theosophical Society and was a new member at the time of the World Convention that was held in New York City, which was in 1975, the 100-year anniversary of the founding of the organization. And I can remember being there, and all of the luminaries from the Theosophical Society were there. That was the first time I had met Radha Bernier. Joy Mills was there. Dora Kuntz was there. Dane Rudyard, who many of you might be familiar with him through his astrological writings. Brilliant man. Also got a chance to meet, for the only time in my life, a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Borka. Probably those of you who are students are aware of his writing of the divine plan, yes. Thank you. He wrote the Divine Plan. He wrote a number of books. One of the books he wrote, probably one that most of you are not familiar with, is a book called Tibet and Tulku, or is it Tulku and Tibet? I love to have this man. I told him to sit near the front. HPB, Tibet and Tulku. Wonderful book, but he talks about a certain idea, a certain theme in that particular book. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Because in 1975, I remember being at the World Congress in New York, and many people had come from all over the world, and there was a great anticipation, this being the last quarter of the century, for what direction this new impulse, this new spiritual upheaval would be coming from. And so depending on who you talk to, you would hear everything from a reincarnation of Blavatsky herself to there was great fervor around the appearance of one of the masters at that time. A lot of different ideas were circulating. Because HPB was so emphatic about the nature of this closing of the last quarter of the century. So, had a chance to meet Jeffrey Borka. Later, after that, is when I read his book on HPB, Tibet and Tulku. The Tulku idea is the one that I think has some meaning for us this evening. Tulku is basically the process by which an overshadowing consciousness expresses itself through an individual or individuals. The examples of such things are the Dalai Lama and that tradition, where it is said that the consciousness of the Dalai Lama has expressed itself now in the 14th Dalai Lama. So time after time it incarnates, it expresses. It was also Borka's contention that this Tulku process was also operational during the time of HPB, and that her appearance was in many ways a reflection of an overshadowing consciousness. And so in 1975, where this overshadowing consciousness would be coming from was what people were looking for. You look back at it now, who are the individuals that we were looking for? Who is the person that came to bring this greater presentation of occult knowledge, as HPB said it? For me, it's difficult to distinguish. It was more difficult then. But I think if we look perhaps a little deeper, think a little differently, then it might be a little bit more apparent, because in every case, this overshadowing consciousness exceeds any individual. In fact, one of the statements of the current Dalai Lama has been that the next Dalai Lama that appears may appear as multiple individuals. Obviously, consciousness is not limited to any single body. There's a quote that I'd like to share with you from the Mahatma Letters, and I think it's worth thinking about. It was a letter that was written to Sinnit, and as often was the case, it was the attempt by one of the Mahatmas to get Sinnit to look deeper, to broaden his view, and to think a little bit differently. So the quote is, "There is more to this movement than you have any inkling of. The work of the TS is linked with similar work going on secretly in all parts of the world." The work of the TS is linked with similar work going on in all parts of the world. So when we think about the TS work, perhaps it might be a mistake on our part to try to limit it to this body, this organization, and the friends and brothers and sisters and members that we're aware of. Perhaps there's more going on than meets the eye. As he said to Sinnit, perhaps there's more going on than we have an inkling of. So what was happening at the close of the 20th century? You know, if we think in that way, a short list would include such things as there was the declaration of this thing called Earth Day that occurred. It occurred as sort of a national event in the US, very quickly became a globally recognized event. There was this idea that came from a group of scientists that the Earth represents a life in and of itself, just as the human being does. So it was called the Gaia theory. Out of this Gaia theory, there was this explosion in the ecological movement, environmentalism, all of these movements that embrace the idea that there is one life expressing in a variety of ways started to take rise. You had the growth of spiritual psychology, transpersonal psychology. You had a spiritualized feminism that came into being, a feminism that didn't speak just in terms of the bodies that we occupy, but the consciousness that is suppressed and finds odd ways of expressing in our behaviors. But consciousness became the focus. And all of these things were rising, were being fed, were growing in ways right in front of our eyes. But it wasn't the person that we anticipated. All of these, and need I say that during the same time, the World Wide Web came into being. All of these things. The fundamental principle that the Theosophical Society has come to express is this idea of the oneness of all life, that there is a unity. And language did not exist for the expression of the types of things that Blavatsky came to bring. She suffered for that. But there is a language that has been well in place now as a result of her efforts and others globally. So where do we find ourselves now? This is the theosophy that has moved to this point. And now, where are we? In the letter from the Mahachohan, there are a number of profound things, but one of the things that he says is this. In talking about theosophy, he says the true religion and philosophy offers a solution to every problem. And the contention was that theosophical teachings, being true, ultimately will triumph. But the solution to every problem is what was being proposed as the nature of a realized theosophy. So, the question for us, of course, and it should be the daily question for us, where do we stand in relation to this type of really radical expression of what is intended by this movement to which we pay dues, from which we have probably received cards that we can keep in our wallet proving that we pay dues, whose literature we study, myself for 45 years, others for longer, others for shorter, but has it solved every problem for you? Or are there one or two left that still need to be addressed? It's a question worth asking, because the true religion, the true philosophy, the true theosophy offers the answer to offers the solution to every problem. So, by virtue of the efforts of those who have come before us, we have been given something wonderful, something unique, something of quality, something that speaks to us because to the extent that we have been able to test it, it has been verified. Otherwise, why bother? But this aspect of demonstration is what seems to speak quite loudly from the idea of a solution to all problems. So, in many respects, we have a very vital, we have concepts, we have ideas that are profound. And this is the initial basis of our study. This is the initial focus of our meditation. These concepts. But the fact of the matter is, whether it's theosophical concepts, whether it's scientific concepts, Christian concepts, atheistic concepts, there are no concepts available that solve every problem. In fact, one of the features of being the president of an organization is that you often find how concepts can cause more problems than they solve. It is not the uncommon experience to have, let me put it this way. If concepts had the capacity for solution, then those who are the best read, the most fluent in quotation and reference, would be the enlightened ones. That has not been my experience. Although in cases it has. But as a general rule, I think it's safe to say that there's no amount of consideration, no amount of steeping ourselves in ideas which in and of itself will do what needs doing. So what is it that will put us in the direction that is suggested by this quotation from the Mahachohan? Probably it's no mystery to anyone that there are a variety of directions in which the human family right now is suffering. We don't need to go down the list. You just pick any one of them, and they're all around us. My contention would be this, that one of the other things that the Mahatma said, the Mahachohan said, was that even though this is the true philosophy, the true approach, that it is something that has to be inculcated gradually. So over 143 years now, we have had the opportunity to gradually inculcate these profound ideas and teachings. Toward the end, that the focus of our work, however we may conceive of it, is always something that relates to unity. The expression through the various means of the oneness of life, of the wholeness of being. And it has been my experience as well that anybody who associates themselves openly with these teachings, who does the necessary work, one of the things that is a necessary outcome of that is that for that person, they necessarily become a healer. Your presence becomes something that heals. I'm not talking about rubbing your hands together and generating energy, although that's a part of it. Because I'm in Adyar, and because there's so many people who had the opportunity to have experienced the life and the personality of Shri Rama. When I never had that opportunity. I never met Shri Rama. But the stories that I have heard about how gentle he was, how always present he was with whoever it was that he was talking with, the wisdom that exuded from him. Many times I've heard a number of stories about people who came to speak to him on different occasions, and coming to him with whatever the latest problem was. And they found themselves sitting down with him, talking about the problem, going over it, expressing how so many things might be wrong. And then when the conversation ended, they would walk away, and always they would say how much better they felt after this conversation. And many times I have heard it said that as they thought about the conversation, one of the things that they realized was that Shri Rama had not said anything. In their minds, there was a back and forth. There was a sense that he's hearing me and commenting, but there was no, it might have been the nodding of the head, but nothing was said. And they walked away feeling renewed. This is an example of a healing presence in the world. This is an example of the capacity that comes from a genuine realization. Probably at the deepest level, when we talk about the unity of all life, it's an expression. We can perhaps describe it talk about what we mean. But for many people, the unity or the oneness of life is more than an expression. It is an experience. And it's an experience that is not unfamiliar to anyone in this room, although for us it tends perhaps to be momentary. It often is the thing that propels us onto this spiritual path, because this is the closest thing that aligns with our memory of some moment of wholeness, which is the meaning of healing. So the unity, the oneness of life, is a phrase, it is an idea that represents something. Behind those words, behind that language, is what's waiting for us. And if the Theosophical Society is to be meaningful in this particular moment, it is not going to be on the basis that we have a better set of concepts than others. In many ways, we do. But what's that going to do for you? That's not the basis of it. The gradual inculcation has been taking place. Theosophy, from the point of view of HPB, was something for a time beyond her time in the world. Frankly, I believe that that time is this time. The rising challenges that we face, wherever we come from in the world today, speak to a need for healing. Speak to a need for a consciousness that doesn't divide, but that can unify. If Theosophy is, wherever you see suffering in the world, or suffering coming into the world, if it is at the hands of someone who is speaking about Theosophy, that's not Theosophy. It is not something designed to divide. It is not something intended to separate. The great heresy of separateness is what we are here to address, first within ourselves, and then it can be something that can be communicated outwardly. But until it is in fact addressed, then we find ourselves, our efforts necessarily being somewhat superficial. So this is the arc. We have a history. We have the blessing of many great individuals who have lived, died, and moved on to make this moment possible. We are in that same process. All of us are here for but a moment. We will do what we can to prepare the ground for those who are yet to come. But in this particular moment, I think it's well for us to recognize a need and a possibility. To ignore it, I think, does harm to the opportunity that we have been given. So just a few thoughts I thought I would share. This moment is a moment that particularly calls for healers in this world. There is no teaching, there is no context more broad than the one with which we have associated ourselves. Dig into it. Allow it to dig into you. And then I think, watch what happens. So as always, I thank you for being attentive, and we'll meet again tomorrow. Thank you.
Finished my introduction. And so I'm glad to have this thanking opportunity to do that. And that is to say that Tim has written many articles. I see a book somewhere, either written by him or a compilation of all of his works. I will make that prediction because I think I'm 100% safe in doing so. Someone will do that. And of course, Tim has spoken all over the world. And that is how so many of you know him. And I know that you feel a personal connection. As Tim said about Shri Rama, being there, listening to people, healing without saying anything, without anybody really even realizing what was going on, I think Tim has that effect on people too. So thank you, Tim.
We will meet today still, not tomorrow. So 7 o'clock dinner, and then the evening program. Thank you.